to in just a moment because we're going to be talking this morning about the 6th Pan-African Congress. We're going to pay some tribute to that for the rest of the hour this morning. Say that one more time.
40th anniversary of that conference, right, Dr. Whalen?
Sure. Of course. No, absolutely. And given that so many issues are still relevant and needing of some sort of response, it is perfectly appropriate that we do that. What's up, Hate? What's up, man? Good morning.
Yeah, it is good morning, man. This is an epic awaited show to get folks who are in attendance at the Pan-African Congress. His brother Keto Swan would like to inform us the Pan-African Congress that occurred in the six-pack was the first in Tanzania.
Yep.
And we got
first on the continent.
Yes, and first in the continent, absolutely. So we got folks who were the first, the organizers from the U.S. contingent, and can't wait to get into this conversation.
All right, so we have a lot to get to. Real quick off the top, though, I do need to sort of make an announcement. Shout out to the brothers who locked down at JCI and all the other men and women locked down in the penitentiary systems and extended plantation systems in this country and around the world, political prisoners in particular. Shout out to all of you. And in that vein, we have an announcement just that we've been asked to share from Keith Comrade Malik Washington, who is the deputy chairman of the new African Black Panther Party prison chapter. And I've been doing some work with Kevin Rashid Johnson, who's one of the founders of that organization as well. Our generation's political prisoners, and we want to just let folks know that they exist, and they've asked us to make folks aware of their chapter and their work. So just very quickly, the new African Black Panther Party prison chapter is an above-ground legal political organization. We are devoted to moving our members beyond the petty criminal lifestyles we all had been formerly living in order to become sober, hardworking, honorable, straightforward, and studious sons and daughters of the working class and the nation of New Africans. We reject racism in all its forms, and we do not advocate illegal activities for the violation of prison rules. We do believe in serving and protecting the people from all oppressors. Later on, they list their 10-point platform. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our black and oppressed communities. We want full employment for our people. Does this sound a little familiar, anybody? I think it does. We want an end to robbery by the capitalists of our black and oppressed communities. We want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. We want decent education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present day society. We want completely free health care for all black and oppressed people. We want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people and other people of color, all oppressed people inside the United States. We want an immediate end to all wars of aggression, and we also want freedom for all black and oppressed people now held in U.S. federal, state, county, city, military prisons, and jails. We want trials by jury of our peers for all persons charged with so-called crimes under the laws of this country. And finally, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, and people's community control of modern technology. That is a statement from the new African Black Panther Party prison chapter. And we want to share our solidarity with them. And we will post this and continue to share this work at imixwhatilike.org. Let's take a quick break. I want to play this track. We've been, this semester, I've had my students writing political prisoners and contacting them and doing research projects on them. And one of my students just submitted his response to the conditions and the treatment of political prisoner Ed Poindexter. So I'm going to play this track. This is by the brother's name is Gino, Morgan State University. It's a dedication to Ed Poindexter. We're going to play this and come back with our wonderful guests and get into this discussion about the 6th Pan-African Congress. So don't go anywhere. Much more coming up here at I Mix What I Like, WPFW 89.3 FM. imixwhatilike.org for more on this show and more. Don't go anywhere. Stick around. Stay tuned. Peace, everybody. Back in just a minute. Fellas, Dr. Burroughs, take it away, my man. Set us up with this conversation we're about to have, and then let's get to, of course, who our special guests are this morning.
Well, I just wanted to talk about the background for the six-pack. First, there was the 1900 Pan-African Conference, and I want to emphasize that the conference, sometimes the scholarship kind of merges and it calls what happened in 1900 a Congress, but it was a conference organized by H. Sylvester Williams, and it started to respond to the carving up of the continent that the European powers did in 1886. So out of that conference comes the address to the nations of the world, a document that begins this struggle for public self-government and self-reliance that the Pan-African Congresses does. And by the way, an interesting historical note, the line of the problem with the 20th century being the color line, that actually comes out of that document, and Du Bois appropriates that and then uses that in the souls of black folks. So just wanted to point that out. Thank you. Thank you. And so out of that conference, you then get Du Bois's involvement, and then he starts being one of the main organizers of the Pan-African Congress, the first, which was in 1919 in Paris. By the way, the Pan-African Conference was in London. And by the way, the first black newspaper in Britain comes out of that conference, the Pan-African, in 1901. But anyway, the first Pan-African Congress comes in 1919. The second in 1921 is in London. And the third is in London, and the fourth is in 1927 in New York. And if I remember correctly, the fourth was in New York because the white people who controlled the NAACP told Du Bois that they couldn't afford the continuing travel, etc. So the Pan-African Congress moved to New York in 1927. And out of these, became petitions. The first pack, they wanted to, the Pan-African Conference in 1900, their first petition was to the Queen of England. The first Pan-African Congress, their petition was to the Versailles Peace Conference. The second Pan-African Congress, their manifesto was to the League of Nations. So you have this tradition of having the conference and then having a declaration come out, and have that declaration be a statement for self-government and self-reliance. Now, the fifth Pan-African Conference was probably the most prominent and important of the previous meetings up until that point. That was in Manchester, England, and that one was organized by Padmore. What's Padmore's first name?
George Padmore.
Thank you, George Padmore, the great journalist and organizer, and Kwame Nkrumah. So that one really set in motion the political development that was going to later happen with the moves for African independence.
Because that's one contained had a lot of the anti-colonial, post-colonial African leadership was most involved with that one.
Who would then become the presidents of their countries,
right.
And it's them becoming the president of those countries that led to the conflicts within the six-pack. So I know we're going to talk about that today, because those very interesting things happened when they became presidents of these countries, and also the development of communism and socialism, and how those movements asserted themselves within the Pan-African movement, which I know we're also going to discuss. So you have the conference in 1900, and then these 5 meetings. And so the sixth Pan-African Congress is significant because, as we've said, it's the first in the African continent. And it's also the first after those major African liberation movements that resulted in folks becoming presidents of their own countries. And so then we have time for all this internal contradiction.
So let's talk about hey, let's have that be our transition into talking about these guests that you have I think wonderfully arranged for us to talk with this morning. Tell us who is actually in our studio today, and then let's bring them into the conversation.
I'll give very brief comments and introduction so we can get straight to the conversation. But we have with us Dr. Sylvia Hill, and I want to call Mama Irene of Zawadi's on U Street, and we're going to have this conversation with Dr. Hill, who is an organizer for the U.S. contingent, and then out of your lineage, an Africana Cornell student. Mama Irene was a student of James Turner's,
And shout out to Dr. Turner. He was
right.
he was endeavoring to join us this morning. We couldn't make that happen.
Endeavoring.
But could you just say real quick? Could you just
is that
say
a word?
real quick?
Is endeavoring a word?
I think it's a word. And you once told me once you get a PhD, you can make things up if necessary.
Yes.
So just in case, if it isn't a word, we make it up. But
except for irregardless, because
that
is not a word.
That is not a word. It should never be spoken again. But could you just say again where Mama Irene's shop is still located, please? I just want to hear that.
So it is an African. It's the name is Zawadi's, which means gift, and it is located on U Street, and it is U Street when U Street was actually black. So it's part of the black.
That's
legacy.
why I wanted to hear that.
Like if you go back to Spook Who Sat by the Door and listen to the FBI agents talk about U Street, you will know what U Street used to be like.
In fact, Dr. Turner said when we were speaking with him, he said she said something to the effect that she deserves to be credited with being able to stay there and keep up the fight to stay there. I just wanted to highlight.
I can't
that.
even be Dr. Hate. This is Kwabena Combe lately talking about Dr. Sylvia Hill. Just figuring out that the organizers and attendees are in DC, are still around. And still doing Pan-African work. With those brief introductions, Dr. Hill, let me ask you, how did you become one of the organizers for the U.S. contingent to the Pan-African Congress in Tanzania?
Well, let me just say in terms of how we even got to the point of having the 6th Pan-African Congress, the organizing started in '69. I was not involved in the early part of that organizing, but Roosevelt Brown, who was then in Parliament in Bermuda, had contact with President Nkrumah, and President Nkrumah posed the question about having a 6th Pan-African Congress on African soil. And Roosevelt Brown then began to bring together people, and that first contingent of people who talked about this, Sonia Sanchez was there, Cortland Cox, Mary Frances Berry, in fact, and many other people, Liz Gant and some other folks. And from basically about 72, right after the National African Liberation demonstration rally that was here in the district of about 40,000 people, which really brought together our largest number of people focused around the question of African liberation in that kind of historical moment. The campaign stepped up. I started getting involved in 72. And we had many ups and downs, as you can imagine. First of all, we didn't have a budget. At the time, I was living in Minnesota and working for Macalester University, and we had a Black Cultural Center. And that center that was in the basement of a hotel, and we had a community group that did classes for black children in St. Paul. But that was the operation base of the 6th Pan-African Congress in terms of its national campaign. There was an office in Washington, D.C., too, that later moved to Tanzania a few months before we actually had the conference. So I got involved actually through Jimmy Garrett, who was a former member of SNCC. And you will notice that a lot of that beginning group of people who they were based here in what was called the Center for Black Education. And the Center for Black Education was much like the Malcolm X University in Durham, North Carolina. It was kind of a counterpart. And we were committed to really developing self-reliance and forging ties, people-to-people ties, between people of Africa, particularly the African liberation movements who were waging armed struggle at that time, and people here in the United States. So that's how I got involved, essentially.
Okay, thank you. And Mama Irene, let's talk about your introduction to the Pan-African Congress. What was happening in the early 70s for you at Cornell, and prior to that brought you to the Congress, and your role in the Congress?
Well, to talk about my role in the Congress is to roll back a few years to being in D.C. in the late 60s, early 70s. I went to the University of Maryland as an undergrad. So in some ways, we were on the periphery. I did not at that time realize how early it was in the integration of the University of Maryland. But it was very clear that Howard, D.C., was the center. So when we talk about the events at Malcolm X Park, the students at the University of Maryland would have to gravitate there. And we were familiar with many of the names there, Cortland Cox, Sylvia Hill. Sylvia probably doesn't know me, but I certainly knew her, knew who she was, and knew most of the people who were active. It's also a part of the Black Studies program. Dr. Berry was at the University of Maryland, so she was one of the people that influenced me, along with a Zimbabwean professor named Mario Inzua, who opened that door to the colonial struggle in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa during that period. So it was, in some ways, sort of a step up to, a big step up, I'll say, to go to Cornell, to be influenced by all the people who came through that center. Dr. Turner, at various times, there were incredible people coming through. Walter Rodney, other people whose name will come to me in a minute. But my particular professor who oversaw my studies in political studies was Wekutso Marapa, who was a Zimbabwean. And he was very much involved in the liberation movement in Southern Africa. And so that was sort of the nexus in which I operated. And of course, Tanzania was very much part of the socialism movement. So we all studied that, was all affected by that, and believed strongly in that. So that was, I think, how I got to go to the Pan-African Congress.
And Dr. Hill, if we could talk about the challenges in bringing the U.S. contingent together, and the people that we were working with that eventually attend the conference.
Okay. Well, we had a particular conception about how we wanted to organize participation in the Congress. As you know, there were many groups who had kind of a Pan-African perspective at that time. And many of them differed with our particular viewpoint about what we thought was very important. We viewed the Congress as an opportunity to kind of really democratize the people who had an opportunity to be concerned about what was happening in the liberation struggles and the Pan-African perspective. And so we wanted to have actually, and we did have, some kind of community regional meetings where people talked about their issues both at a local and a national and an international level. And so, for example, in New Orleans, you get a good mix of people who really threshed out those kinds of concerns. Modibo Kadali in his book talks about that kind of real debate and, ideological kind of real conflict that happened in the Atlanta kind of region around Georgia there. So we had, in order to, first of all, have a plane full of people, you had to have kind of categories of people. So we had guests, we had delegates, we had visitors. And the many people went as visitors. The delegation really ended up being about 200 and some folks, but not all of them were participants in the Congress, because they would have outnumbered the nation-state representatives, actually. But there were many activities for them to do, much of it cultural, and in some political kinds of forums that were kind of handled at University of Dar es Salaam while the conference was going on.
And I guess that's kind of important because the U.S. delegation was kind of controversial in terms of the people feeling that African Americans were going to be too dominant a force within the Congress. If you could talk about that for a second.
Well, and it continues to be somewhat of an issue for African Americans. Sometimes we assert the ugly American side of us when we want to be very dominant in these situations. And our notion was that, first of all, we had Afro-Europeans. We had Afro-descendants of the Pacific Islands. We had people from Aborigines from Australia who said they were the original people. We had people, from the Caribbean and from Brazil. So, there were many people of African descent there, as well as people from the continent. People from the continent tended to represent governments, and as did the Caribbean. The first conflict, and one of the reasons why the great revolutionary C.L.R. James was not at the Congress, was over the demand that by the Caribbean governments that the revolutionary activists not be permitted to participate in the Congress. And so that was a split that, as C.L.R. James always said, that is a strike against me, and I will not participate in the Congress if they can't participate in the Congress. So there were those kinds of conflicts that happened, but there were also conflicts around the question of who should participate and represent the voice of the United States. And the kind of dominant activists, Amiri Baraka, Owusu Sadaki, Haki Madhubuti, and 2 or 3 others who are not coming to me right now, but Kwame Ture. So their view was that they should be the representatives, and that you didn't want to mix other people who were not really deeply involved in the struggle and politics in this kind kind of international context.
Actually, Kwame Ture said that that there was
Hold on a second. Let's come back to that real quick. Let's use that as a teaser, and we'll come back with what what Kwame Ture just said, or rather what he had previously said. Let's hold off on it. We got to take a quick break here at I Mix What I Like, WPFW 89.3 FM. I Mix What I Like.org for more on the show and more. We will be back with our 2 wonderful guests and the full I Mix What I Like crew for more conversation on the 6th Pan-African Conference and related issues. Don't go anywhere. Much more coming up right here again at I Mix What I Like, WPFW 89.3 FM.
Greetings. I'm Katia Stitt, Interim Program Director of WPFW. Thank you, danke, shukran, merci, gracias, amasakanakalam, toda, kuwashukuru, wado. Whatever language you speak, the staff, programmers, volunteers, and boards of WPFW sincerely thank you for your financial support of our fall fundraising drive. With your support, WPFW will continue to uphold the universal languages of justice, peace, and music for the next 7 generations. 89.3 FM, WPFW, your station for jazz and justice.
It's Blackfist Fridays.
I mix what I like. Welcome back, everybody. I Mix What I Like. Welcome back, everybody. I Mix What I Like, WPFW 89.3 FM. I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. I Mix What I Like.org for more information on this show and more. We're going to continue, get right back into our conversation with Mama Irene and Dr. Sylvia Hill, talking about the 6th Pan-African Conference with the full I Mix What I Like crew in the building. And the teaser we just had gotten to a moment ago which was surrounding comments made by Kwame Ture Please go ahead and let's get right back into it.
Thank you, because I thought I had read somewhere where Kwame Ture was against this Congress and said, quote, "You have no historical right to do this." So I just wanted to.
And if I can, I just want to give a shout out to my comrade and colleague, Dr. Latasha Levy, because where I first read about this statement, and this was in an interview that she conducted with Sylvia Hill here, one of our guests, and Judy Claude, in Remembering the Six Pack, interviews with Sylvia Hill and Julia Claude, organizers of the Sixth Pan-African Congress, in the Black Scholar Journal. Shout out to Dr. Levy for conducting that interview and providing us with some background we can use for the show. But yeah, he had made this comment, Ture did, about who is legitimately capable or in place to carry out this Congress. Please.
Yes, he did say that. And, I think that just in the historical context, there were several forces vying for the center stage of the political reality of that time. And certainly Kwame Ture, All African People's Party, was one kind of strain, and Owusu Sadaki, an African Liberation Support Committee. And then there was the Six-Pack group, and we were trying to organize this worldwide conference, and those organizations were saying, well, where did you all come from? And the point was, we had come out of really, many people had come out of the SNCC, and the feeling was that politically, the struggle internal to the country had reached a crescendo, and we were now in a phase of people assuming local state government power where they could, and struggling against, racism and Jim Crowism and so forth. The change in the United States, in order for it to take place, it needed to have external countries that were stronger, the third world, and among those, African liberation forces. So many of us felt that it was important to build solidarity with the African liberation movements as they challenged Portuguese colonialism, South African Rhodesian apartheid. So, but in order to do that, you have to build a popular support and people-to-people ties and knowledge of what's going on. And so I would just remind people that technology was not on our side during that time either, because that's very important to even understanding what we were doing and how unusual it was. We did not have WPFW, we, for the most part, really didn't have, most radio stations were only on in the black community for a certain number of hours, and that was for music during that time. In large part, we had to communicate through newsletters and newspapers, word of mouth, phone. The fax machine was not yet. Internet was not yet. And so some of even the challenges when we arrived in Tanzania, first off, we had to find electric typewriters because they had traditional manual typewriters, and we had to produce those documents overnight in 5 different languages. And fortunately, once the Presbyterian Church, Mary Jane Patterson, had some typewriters, electric typewriters, flown over from Kenya, so that we could move faster. We had mimeograph machines, and I always have to explain what a mimeograph machine is, because folks your age don't know of your craft machine.
The pre-copy and paste.
Those are the ones that smell good.
And
We used to sniff the blue ink.
Right.
And I mean, but real quick, I know this is not what we're here to talk about today, but I just want to emphasize very quickly that so much more seems to have happened prior to all this new media technology, and that I feel like that so much more of an investment, it seems, a political commitment to the work came with this absence of technology. Whereas today, with all that we have, it feels like not enough is taking place along these lines. So I mean, we should be cognizant of that. The biggest revolutionary movements occurred before the internet.
Yes. But one of the quick things I want to point out is that the six-pack gave a historical moment for the African liberation movements to make their case to the larger population, so that to the participants at the Congress, so that on the agenda became the question of the liberation from Portuguese colonialism, from South Africa, and from Rhodesia. And so some of us returned to the United States. That's when I moved to Washington, D.C. A group of us moved here who weren't living here, and we committed ourselves to work on the question of changing U.S. foreign policy toward South Africa, Rhodesia at that time.
Before we get to that, I just want to ask, how stung or disappointed were you by the ideological conflicts between the people who were defining pan-Africanism as just class struggle versus the traditional black nationalist or traditional cultural-based pan-Africanism, because there was a very, very serious schism between the two groups, and the former group even said we shouldn't organize, we shouldn't have a pan-Africanist Congress, we shouldn't organize based on race. So how stung or disappointed were you as an African American coming back dealing with that kind of ideological conflict?
Well, I've always felt that issue was phrased incorrectly. And I just don't think it's either or. It depends on what circumstance you're in, whether class is primary versus race. It depends on the political issue at the time. Certainly for the African liberation movements, right, class was very important, because the people, sometimes the people that they were struggling against were black people, black Africans like themselves. So they saw a class distinction in that particular historical context, which was a good analysis for that particular kind of issue they were dealing with. But they also saw the race issue, particularly when you moved into the international sphere with Western imperialism. So they couldn't deny that either. But it was a strange moment, because it was like we were talking past each other. And people were so wedded to these two ideological perspectives that they wanted to see separately, and they wanted to view as, I am the right one.
Well, good thing this doesn't happen anymore. We've clearly overcome all of these problems and moved forward.
Right. We are still there, right?
So if I can, and I have to note, like, this is not the history of SNCC that we get, that SNCC folks actually go on to do the organizing work of the Pan-African liberation, violent, armed struggles. So this is great. But I'm remembering now how we even got, for me personally, to this conversation as I stumble as Kwabena Kom lately into Zawadi's, and I'm talking with Mama Irene about things, and she's like, I'm asking her, you seem like you know a lot.
And when you stumbled in, where were you again? Where was this?
This is on U Street, between like 16th and 15th Street. You got to just go. It's an incredible store. And you get in there and you meet Mama Irene, and she is an archivist of our cultural and historical and political reality.
As she just now demonstrated once again.
Yes, because we have in our hands like these documents that are the mimeographs from those sessions.
Right.
And you just don't see this stuff.
Including her delegate tickets.
Oh, my.
Absolutely.
She has that.
Absolutely. A card-carrying Pan-African Congress
Her
attendee.
lunch ticket.
So
Yes.
Tickets.
So, Mama
That
Irene,
is so wonderful.
walk us.
I have virtually nothing.
Well, that's the
Right,
great thing
say
when
you're
we
doing-
get together.
Yeah,
we find
right.
That, we do. And I asked myself, how did I keep these things all these years? And I guess there's a reason.
Yes.
this show.
Yeah, I was
Right.
waiting for the show.
And I will say,
But
you
let
know,
me
that-
just say, it really should be in the Smithsonian. Then the reason I say that is so much of the presentation of us as a people omits our real international solidarity. And we have a long history, from 18th and 19th century. If there were two people who had a little bit of liberation, they tried to help and be in solidarity with Africa.
And the best thing is, Mama Irene still has the bullets that took out the white nationalists who were holding Southern Africa hostage. She went in and dug them out. So when I say archivists, where their bones are buried and the bullets are kept secret. So, Mama Irene, what are the best highlights, or what are the movement? What are the moments that moved you from being there physically in that space? If that was also your first trip to Africa.
It was indeed my first trip to Africa, and it was just, I'm here. Unbelievably, I'm here. To be in Tanzania, that we had studied in a classroom, to see President Nyerere, even at a distance, was an extraordinary moment. To be in a country where black people were in power, to see so many names and faces that had been a study, but now you're seeing this in reality, was truly, truly incredible. And maybe that's why I've kept all these things. And maybe that's why things came together for me in terms of art, because as Dr. Hill mentioned, there were certain things that visitors/students were not able to attend. So we had more time on our hands, which was a great thing. We could survey, we could visit the markets, and one of the things, or several things I brought home, were Makonde art pieces, baskets, things that I still have and still value so much. And eventually, after sort of searching for what I was supposed to do in life, I did discover that African art, a pan-Africanist approach to African art, was what was to be my force in life.
And we're gonna continue this interview with Mama Irene in the African Marketplace series, because she's opened up a whole world of Pan-African artists. We've heard some, including Marvin Seen. But as you're talking about the legacy, I want to move back to Dr. Hill and ask you, what is the legacy of the work that occurred in the Pan-African Congress, from how you were involved and how it evolved?
And let me just remind everybody real quick that they're listening to I Mix What I Like here at WPFW 89.3 FM, as we have our very special conversation with Mama Irene of Zawadi's on U Street here in Washington, D.C.
Between 15th and 16th, and get in there and get all your pre-Kwanzaa and other holiday gifts and your gifts for African people.
And Dr. Sylvia Hill, two people instrumental in arranging and organizing and documenting the history of the Sixth Pan-African Congress. 1974 in Tanzania. So that's what we're doing here this morning. IMixWhatILike.org for more information and more. At IMixWhatILike at all your relevant social media. Let's keep it going, Dr. Hill, please.
I think one of the great things about the Sixth Pan-African Congress is actually the number of people for whom that was the first time. I think of Hodari Ali. That was his first time in Africa. Wow. The late Hodari Ali, who was a part of this station. Queen Mother Moore, who had worked for so many years, and you might remember she kissed the ground when she got off the plane, the tarmac really at the time. But Charles Ogletree was on that trip as a young student at that time. So people have gone on to do individually great kinds of things. But one point I want to make is that today, November the 21st, in 1984, we launched the campaign of civil disobedience against the South African embassy and against U.S. foreign policy. And, of course, that was kind of a catalyst for a lot of action that was going on around the world, particularly inside South Africa. as people struggled for their freedom there. And it ultimately led to sanctions. And so I want to just point that out because many people don't know that out of the Sixth Pan-African Congress, people returned, they worked, and and it ultimately led to significant change, both for the people of the region of Southern Africa, but as well as a significant change for us, because that was the first and only foreign policy defeat that Ronald Reagan suffered. And it was one of the significant foreign policy victories led by African American people in the United States.
And so the organizers come back and are debriefing, and what was the challenge of the Congress as you're debriefing from it? And, how did it inspire you to either participate, further within those movements before we get to the South African anti-apartheid struggles? How did you make sense of the Pan-African Congress now? What are your thoughts on that? If I can open that back up to both Mama Irene and Dr. Hill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would say that I was already involved with the African Liberation Movement in the Africana Studies at Cornell, and that it probably strengthened my understanding of what that movement was about. It certainly gave me a new idea of Pan-Africanism. I will say one thing, that maybe because I was a student, I was quite naive about what was going on under the appearance of unity. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I knew there was a class, race struggle and lots of conversation, but I did not have a sense of what that struggle meant in terms of that that particular point in time. I was there. It went smoothly as far as I could see. It was all wonderful. Then you do come back, look at that in retrospect and say, oh, this was going on, this was happening. And I read an interview that you did in 2003, which was highly detailed about some of the tensions. And that was very, very critical. But I could see that having gone there, actually having also gone to Somalia as sort of a side trip.
Yes, that's true. Many people did have opportunities to go to other countries.
Right, made it really a more Pan-African experience for me. And also took away some of the romanticism. I think many African Americans have that kind of, we're all queens and kings and Africa is wonderful. But having seen these two countries and having later some experience in other countries, it sort of gives you a more realistic approach to Africa. And I think we have to work from that realistic approach rather than a romantic relationship.
So I wanted to ask, in hindsight, we're also learning in the early 70s about COINTELPRO. And I wanted to know, if in hindsight, did you experience or have you uncovered any links to COINTELPRO, anti-six-pack, or attendees and organizers' activities as it stood?
And didn't that interview, Dr. Hill, that you were part of with Professor Levy, didn't it say something to the effect that the FBI had involved itself in the airline ticket issue or something like that may...
Yes, actually, 1 week before we were to depart, and we had a travel contract with an airline, and the airline said that it had been visited by the FBI because they wanted to look at our manifest list. And of course, just as a little sideline detail, because most people don't know this, but when you're going out of the country, you have to provide a manifest list to the State Department of everybody who was going to be on the plane. So we had done that, and you have to have 30-day notice. Well, the airline argued that they got a little shaky on this, and so they canceled the contract. So a week before, we had no plane to take this 209 people.
Wow.
But I must say that the embassy, both Ambassador Bomani and the First Secretary Hamza Aziz, rose to the challenge and made arrangements with the airline of India to fill in for that airline. And then the Tanzanian airline picked up from London to Dar es Salaam. But just want to say that that was a true challenge, and it was such a derailment, flying back and forth, trying to get that sorted out. And then I learned that the President Nyerere had to request that these 209 people be in Tanzania in order to get around the 30-day notice. So we did manage to get that. But those are just some kind of little tensions and struggles that happen that by the time, we got people on the airplane, we almost collapsed.
Look, I know unfortunately we're running out of time, but and we're probably just going to have to do this again because there were a lot of issues. I really appreciated not only that you all came in today, but also that in that one piece I keep making reference to with Dr. Levy, you all really talk about and have demonstrated here today this issue of women not just being the ones who were the organ in terms of preparing the logistics, but that you all were integral parts of the putting this thing together, making it happen, continuing the discussions and the education on it. I just greatly appreciate the. Go ahead, man. Yeah, I mean,
Can we do a part two? Is that?
I'm hoping that we have to. I mean, I'm just saying that there's a lot of that we didn't get to, and that. I just we greatly appreciate your time, and Dr. Hayden, I want to thank you publicly for making this thing happen, and shout out to Dr. Turner as well. And our whole Mix What I Like crew. Mama Irene, we have about 90 seconds. If there's one last thing you'd like to say, or Dr. Hill? About Zawadi, maybe, or something?
I won't say this about Zawadi because to me Zawadi is just part of a larger cultural issue here in D.C. and around the country. I think what we are seeing is that loss. When I came back from Africa in '92, there was a plethora of African American cultural stores. Now people come in and they say, well, you're the only one left. You're the only person left standing. And my response is that's a very, very lonely place to be. I don't want to be the last store. And we see our newspapers, our magazines disappearing. I still have this Black World, which covers the six-pack, and I say, how will we get that information? Yes, we can use the mainstream, but that doesn't tell us our story.
And I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap it up there. That's what we do here at I Mix What I Like, WPFW 89.3 FM. I MixWhatILike.org for more. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of you for listening. We're going to ride out with this track produced right here in D.C. called Animals. Omar Retinue, musical genius. Gabriel Asheru Ben is on the track. Cats from all over the continent. This will be our closing moment. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for listening. I Mix What I Like, WPFW. We'll catch you in the whirlwind, everybody. Peace.